So, Bill, why don't you give us a little background about how you got into spearfishing and a little bit of your history?
Okay. I did a little bit of diving. I went to La Jolla High School, and I did a little ab diving and spearfishing, but it was pretty rudimentary then. And then I went in the Navy for 4 years, and so I was gone, and I didn't do any. In the 60s, I was working on the sheriff's office, and I had a friend on there, and he was into scuba diving, and he told me I ought to get interested in scuba diving, and I hadn't been back diving at all at that point. I was swimming and fishing, and he said you could combine those. So I got certified for scuba, and I found out I needed to have something to do between scuba tank dives, so I started free diving, and I found that I liked that more than the tank diving. So I seriously started getting into that, got a boat. Actually, I didn't get a boat right away. I did, yeah. Got referred to Jack Perdonovich when I was buying spearfishing gear from our local dive shop, which was the diving locker in Pacific Beach. And I met Jack to get, he invited me to come over and talk to him and give me all the pointers that he thought I could use, and so we became friends, and I gradually got accepted into the diving community and got to know a lot of the guys. And over the years that I dove, which was around 40, seriously, it was about 45 years, I dove with 192 different people. I'd get people referred to me from the diving locker or from some other friend, and if they wanted to go diving, I would say, sure, I'll take you diving with me if you want to go. You just pay for the gas, and we'll go do it. And the rest just sort of happened.
What year was that when you first started diving?
When I first got really serious about it, it was probably 65, 66.
Okay, and then what were your targeted species in 1965? Were you guys still mainly looking for white sea bass or yellowtail?
Well, primarily, I would say yellowtail was the main target, but certainly white sea bass at the time of year when they were around were also there. And then I would always take a decent sized barracuda or a decent sized bonita, and decent for those would have been probably 7-8 pounds for a barracuda and around 10 for a bonita maybe. And then yellowtail, and I shot tuna in there too, but they were not as frequently around my dive areas like the Coronado Islands and La Jolla. So I only shot tuna out there on 2 different occasions. And I didn't see them very often. Aside from that, if I would have seen them and I would have had a shot, I would have certainly taken it.
Yeah, are you talking about the bluefin tuna down by the coast?
Yeah, bluefin. And they were small. They were small bluefin too.
In the early 80s, or just maybe throughout your whole time of diving?
Well, I was throughout the whole time. Not sure. I had a record. I kept a daily log when I would dive. I had where I went, who I went with, if anybody, and what the conditions were, water temperature, visibility, current, and what I shot, what I saw that I either shot and hit or shot and missed or shot and lost, and the ones that I got.
Yeah, so I always encourage people to keep a log and do the same thing because you never know. Over time, and I'm sure you've noticed, you start to see patterns, and then you can be more strategic when you decide to ask your wife to go diving. So, what were some common things that you saw, like with yellowtail or with your whatever targeted species that you noticed as far as through your logs, like as far as currents or tides or moon phase or any of that stuff?
Well, I did most of my diving at the Coronado Islands, and I would want to go diving, so I would go, and if the current was not to suit me, I would still swim and give it a try. But I can't say that there was anything that really stood out as far as a better time. Usually it was somewhere between April and November for the yellowtail at the islands, and usually it was more like the hot and heavy part would be June, July, August, and maybe into September. But I shot them out there year-round I don't think I ever went there in January, but I was there. I shot them in February, and I shot them up till November. But I never really gave too much. I just saying I never gave too much thought about. I would get up to the front of the bait school, or I would work the edges of the kelp up current and anchor the boats. I'd always swim up current from the boat. I say always, or mostly. There was a couple of times I didn't. Once or twice I was real sorry.
What would you say? Like, this was like 1965. You said you started to get pretty serious about it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then, so what year are you still diving now, or did you stop?
No, I dove up until about 2010, probably right around there, maybe 2012. I had like I said, I had all those records, and I was going through stuff around here, and I had so much stuff, and I had notebooks full of that, and I was looking at it, and all my kids are grown up, my grandkids are all grown up, and nobody was going to look at it, nobody was going to use it, and I wasn't diving anymore, so I trashed it all just to get it out of my way.
I bet that must have been some interesting reading for some of us, as far as looking at dive logs for 40 years, 50 years.
Yeah.
How old are you right now, currently?
84.
84. Awesome. Did you ever dive with Bill McIntyre?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he's about 81. He's up in San Clemente. I was just asking, curious about that.
Yeah, I only
did
drove
you travel
San Clemente.
much outside of San Diego?
I drove to Loreto in Baja. Right before the road was totally completed, they had it open, but there was a few stretches that weren't paved yet in it. I drove down there, and that was like 72 or 73, and I made that drive, seemed like 75 times, and then I flew down there about 2 or 3 times. And other than that, I dove a little bit off the coast up here between Tijuana and Ensenada a few times, but mainly La Jolla and Coronado Islands.
Over the course of the years in diving, and like you said, La Jolla and Point Loma and Coronados, did you notice much of a change, good or bad, as far as in the fish populations, or as far as this fish population? Well,
up until the time when they banned gill netting along close in here, that had really a major bad effect on the gill netting. Had a bad effect on the white sea bass for sure. You could see a huge decline in that. Or there weren't once it was banned, then they really came back pretty well in a reasonably short period of time of, 3, 4, 5 years. Other than that, it didn't seem to change too much. We'd get occasional warmer, red tide years, and if we didn't get a red tide during that, why, it was really pretty nice and a lot more fish, and that's when we'd occasionally get the tuna in. So lately, guys have been getting tuna, and they've even shot wahoo up here, and I never saw any wahoo up here, and tuna very scarcely. So it's changed, and of course the Mexican government has had their oar in the water and made it a lot more difficult to dive out there at the islands.
Yeah, you're like the third person that I've spoke with that talked to me about the impact that gill nets had on the fish population just here locally. And when that ban happened, it was a noticeable increase in fish population. So that's it's good to know that too, just from divers, not necessarily scientists. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's awesome because you can apply that. It's a simple fix. You could probably apply that to many different reefs and ecosystems, and yeah. Also, so with all the years of fishing, what would you say your most memorable fish catch was?
Probably the ones that stand out the most are the ones where I almost drowned, because those were really, really exciting.
Yeah, we got a few of I got a few of those too. A couple of my friends did.
Yeah. In our dive club, I was the president for 3 years, a vice president 1 year, and when we first formed the club in '94, I decided we should have a safety column as often as we could, try to point stuff out to people that were getting new guys that were coming into the sport that might not think about some things. And so I took on the job of writing a safety column for our monthly newsletter.
Was that probably the bottom scratchers or the San Diego freedivers?
The bottom scratchers were still several members alive at that time, but they were down to probably half a dozen. And so our club was the San Diego Freedivers, the club that I joined at that time, or we started up in '94.
Yeah, I'm in the club myself. There's a lot of good divers, a lot of knowledge in that club, and history too.
I had one of our members got upset with me because I was trying to get what I was trying to do was to get people who were divers who weren't members of the club to join the club. And he looked at it like I was trying to get more people to start diving, and he was kind of against that because he didn't want to have more people out there than there already were. And I said, well, I'm not going around golf courses trying to recruit people to come and be divers, but I would like for everybody that is a diver to belong to our club, because somewhere in the future, they're going to start legislating laws that are really going to affect us. And it'll be nice if we have a group of people, because somebody's going to listen to a group where they're not going to give an individual much credit for anything. And I'd like to have everybody that's doing this join the group and support it and be ready for when that happens. And so he agreed that was okay finally. But
no, it's funny you mention that, because I literally did a podcast this week where we were talking about fishermen, divers, and how divided everybody is that does fairly the same activity of getting fish, and how much of an impact we could make on the local laws and all of that stuff if we were somehow just binding together rather than always, trashing on each other about diving versus fishing or whatever it is. But, I think that's a huge thing that's a really good point you mentioned, that as far as diving, joining a club, and I think people don't realize that these clubs, that are out there, it's almost like they're not just diving clubs, they're conservation clubs, but it's conservation, in my opinion, kind of the right way from the people that spend time in the water. So they're knowledgeable on the impact that everything has, and they see it,
That's a good point. And it's, the thing about it is, if you have people that get into the club, you can get different viewpoints from all the members, and you can start to do some education along the lines of, don't shoot everything in the world. If you're after a specific kind of fish, like you're talking about, what's your main target? Why? I think that's a good thing, that you get people involved, and you can pass on some safety information. They can get it, those that want it, and you can, just make your sport known to the public, and they know what you're about, and that you're not just out there taking everything in the world. Like, you see a lot of times people going through tide pools and things and picking up everything, and they're not going to utilize it. And it used to be, when there weren't so many people around, it wasn't too bad if somebody was doing that. But with the amount of people we have now using the ocean, the bays, it's nice that there are people trying to conserve it. I don't mind conserving. I don't like the idea of putting everything off limits like they've done with these marine restricted areas. We tried to talk to them when they were doing that about, well, the pelagic fish don't live here all the time. We're not going to hurt if we do this here in the summer when yellowtail come through La Jolla. It's not going to, free diving is not going to hurt any species. If you're free diving, you're just not going to, it's not like commercial. It's not even like rod and reel. You have a specific target, and you go for that, and you're letting everything else, schools of this and schools of that, go by, and you're after a big fish. Sometimes you're after a small one, but I can recall seeing yellowtail as small as 6 or 8 inches, and they're really beautiful. But it's just not, it just didn't make sense to shoot at a 5-pound or 7-pound fish unless you hadn't had one that year and you just wanted some yellowtail for ceviche or something for dinner that night. You'd pass up way, way more than you ever shoot.
No, that's a super good point. I've also seen on kelp patties, the smaller 6-inch yellowtail. And, they are beautiful, beautiful little fish. When you were diving back then, did you notice, like, in general, the size of the fish? Was it smaller? Was it bigger? Were there, like, more 30 and 40 pounders around? Or, due to gill netting, was they, on average, a little smaller? Did you notice any trends like that?
Well, it would be hard to say like that, because you'd see, you'd see days when you would see schools of small yellowtail, and you wouldn't see anything maybe in a school that you could get close to that you wanted to shoot. And I had one week where I got a 30 and a 35 pound yellowtail at the islands, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that was unusual. Those were big fish. You didn't see a 30 pound or 35 pound yellowtail real often. I mean, you might see a school of 400 fish come up at you, or 1,000 fish. Couldn't count them all, but there wouldn't be one close to you that was really, really obviously big. And I didn't recall seeing it, any of that diminish. My typical routine out there was I'd go out there and I'd anchor my boat, and if I had somebody with me, that was probably about half the time I had somebody, or maybe a little more than 50% of the time I'd have guys going with me. But I dove by myself a lot because I wanted to go, and if I didn't have anybody during the week, after I got retired in the 80s, why I could go any time, and I didn't always get somebody to go with me. But I don't know. I don't know where I went with that.
That was a big problem even starting out in 2000 was trying to find people to dive with. That's another good point of those clubs is, and dive buddies, if you can just, everybody can get on the same page. But yeah, there were so many times, I dove by myself in the early days, just, for me. And it's not safe necessarily, at least it's not as safe as you can make it, I guess. But I think that's the great thing about clubs is that that community.
Yeah, I got to the point where I wanted people, I wanted people that were diving with me in my boat out at the Coronado Islands to wear a flag on their belt. And one of the members of our club, Bob Johnson, had designed he had a weight, a 2 3/4 pound weight that was mounted on a pivot on your waist, on your weight belt, and it had a flag that you could pull out of this that stood on a mast about 3 feet tall, and it was a red flag with a white slash on it, and a dive flag. And when you would dive, since this was on a pivot, it would still be pointing up, and it would be, your legs would be up in the air or up towards the air, and the flag would be pointed up that way, and you could dive down, and when you came up, it flopped back up where the flag was up in the air, and because you were laying flat on the water. If you stood up in the water, the flag was up about a little over your head, a little ways over your head. But I had lost people out there a couple of times, and it took me a long time to find them because some guys would swim out around Pukey Point and go down the windward side, and to try to find one guy standing if he was laying down when we went looking for him, we weren't going to see him because he wouldn't even resemble a seal at that point. So I really like people to wear those because if you shot something, or they shot something, you come up and yell, and they could see where you were, or you could see where they were, and you swim over and give them a hand if they needed, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's one of the scary things about diving. When you're on your boat, is losing people. Because it's just I just never want to make that phone call and try to
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting, though. That kind of leads me into the whole gear. Like, how do you think the dive gear has changed over the years? I mean, you dove till 2010. I never even had plastic fins until about then. I never had carbon fiber fins or any of that stuff till about then. I mean, how has the gear changed over the years?
Well, it's changed dramatically. It was guns have way improved what they were originally, or not originally, but when I first started diving. Face masks, huge difference. I've still got some old Voight Swim Masters that have a Pinocchio nose on it with a purge, so you could purge. And I started out diving with those, and they were really a great mask back then. I lost one on the surf one day, and they cost $3, so I spent about 30-40 minutes trying to find that in the surf coming in after a dive. Dive masks change, low volume that just increases your ability to clear your ears farther, easier. And The snorkel improved a lot. They made them a little bigger diameter, and put a purge in them, and put a baffle on the top to where it drains the water out coming down if it's sloshing over. Weight belts got away from actual heavy, bulky lead chunks hanging around your waist to nice sewed up pockets full of buckshot. And lots and lots of great improvements. And the safety part of it, that got better wetsuits, better life vests. Guns have improved. Fins, I can't think of anything that hasn't vastly better than it used to be.
Did you guys dive with float lines and floats back in the early?
I have done that, but I primarily used a reel, a gun with a reel. I was never figuring to shoot up here. I mean, I was never figuring to shoot something that was going to be too big. I just didn't. I passed up a thresher shark one day that really, really clear water, beautiful conditions, and I saw him coming. I knew something was coming because the bait took off, and I made a dive down and got down about 20, 30 feet and was laying there, and here he came, and he went by probably 4 feet off the end of my gun. I could have shot him in the eyeball, the gill plate, or the gills, or anywhere. And I thought, that's good eating, but I'm hooked to this gun with a reel, and it's never going to work out. So, you pass that up. If you got the float line, if you want to shoot it, you can go ahead and shoot it. Same with black sea bass. I didn't shoot those very often because I didn't. I liked them. I liked the meat, but I didn't want to shoot a big one. I would rather have one around 50 to 80 pounds somewhere than shoot a big one. Jack always said those things ought to have work painted on the side of them.
Ought to have, what was that, work?
Yeah. So much work that you should be advised before you shoot this. It's going to be a lot of work.
That's perfect. It's so true. I guess it's a good point. Like, there's always a little bit of maturity as you grow as a diver, knowing, to hold back and when not to hold back and when to hold back, because, especially with social media these days, everybody wants a picture of a giant fish. And if you're not equipped for it, it's just not going to be beneficial for anybody, including the fish in that,
Yeah, I got a little sad about the club after I wasn't quite as I wasn't quite as active in the club when this happened, but I had guys criticizing each other or somebody, not in our own little newsletter, but going online and criticizing. One guy's criticizing somebody for shooting too small of a fish, and the other, somebody else is maybe criticizing somebody for shooting too big of a fish. And I'm thinking, you guys, you ought to work this stuff out at the club meeting. Talk to the guy first of all. It's, there can be a real good point to shoot a small fish if you have a particular real good reason to do it. If you shoot a big fish, true, it's a breeding fish and you're taking them out of the breeding pool, but there's a good point to be made for shooting a big fish too. So, but the main thing should be you should take it up with whoever's doing something that displeases you, and instead of getting it out and airing it out in the whole public.
Right. Imagine that, actually, talking to people about an issue. So it's a good point you bring up as far as, I've seen this a lot too with sheep's head is always a big hot button for some people. Shooting too many, shooting too big. Do you have any thoughts on that? They're great ceviche, but did you guys used to target sheep's head as well?
Target shoot? Oh, you mean did we target them? I love sheepshead. They're probably one of the best white meat fish. They fry real well. They're a nice big fish like that. You got all the meat. You can make a really good fish broth, or to make soup out of. They're great for that, and the meat is good in that too. It's a very nice fish, and if I had a good shot at a 10-pound shoot, maybe even a 5-pound sheepshead, and the shot was good. I wasn't going to put my shaft into some rocks behind them. I would take that. I like sheepshead.
Did you notice the same with sheepshead as far as any difference in the population over the years?
Well, I would say there's definitely a whole heck of a lot less of them. I didn't really see all that many sheepshead free diving. I could get sheepshead when I was tank diving, and I was using a pole spear. So I did that during the winter when the yellowtail and white sea bass weren't around. I would, I saw that they're worth protecting. There's a point to have some limits on. I don't know if we call them ground fish, but certainly the fish that are going to be staying in one area, that as opposed to pelagic
fish.
Yeah.
I've noticed that too. Sheepshead, like you see people with stringers full of them, and I think the big issue now is that the diving population has exploded as well, and along with fishing, we as divers have the opportunity to be selective, right? And if I always say there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with taking, one or two, but you got to understand the impact that fish plays, the role it plays in that ecosystem, and the impact that it has by removing it, on the urchins, and especially with sheepshead, and just the breeding thing as well. So I'm, I try to not be the moral police, because everybody has their own code, but just, I think that's the good thing about a club, is just educating, each other on the targeted fish that everybody's going for, just so everyone can make a little bit more smarter decisions to pull the trigger or not,
During lobster season, I'd be diving for lobster and abalone and fish and found gear. I found absolutely tons of, I found masks and snorkels and fins and spear guns and fishing rods and knives, and I even found a spare air one day tank diving. And when I was doing that, I would shoot rockfish. They're only about a little bigger than your hand, but you get a nice little fillet of really nice firm fish, and they're really good for frying or make ceviche. Yellowtail is still my favorite food fish, because you can make ceviche out of it, you can smoke it, you can fry it, you can barbecue it, you can even make chili. Bob Johnson had a recipe for chili, yellowtail chili, and it was edible.
I've never heard of that. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're saying it wasn't that good?
Well, it was good, but it wouldn't, if you were expecting to get beef beef flavor with it, it's not close to that. But it was good. It wouldn't probably make it for a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who are prejudiced against fish, and it's only because they've never had any really decent fish.
I can certainly identify with that. I mean, for a lot of years, I enjoyed hunting fish, and there was only one or two ways I actually enjoyed cooking it, but I never really had a meal where I was like, wow, that's delicious. until I was in Hawaii when I was, in my early 20s, and then had some apaka, which is real deep fish, but it showed me that there's ways to cook the fish, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So then I had some friends show me some really good recipes, and it's a game changer when you can actually like the thing that you're killing, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I really enjoyed cooking fish for people that, and I had a lot of people. I would take a yellowtail and marinate it in some marinade that I would make up, and it either that or cook it with bacon wrapped around it like they do with a filet mignon, and put mayonnaise on the main part of the meat to give it some protection from the heat right off the bat. And they would swear that it wasn't fish. And I said, well, this is fish. It's fresh, and that's why it tastes good to you. And, yellowtail certainly has a flavor. It shouldn't taste strong or taste bad. But I had people that didn't think they liked fish that liked some the way I cooked it. Including at the club barbecue. A couple of years I did barbecue.
Yeah, one of our really popular ways to have the smoked yellowtail, cut it super thin strips, so it's like almost like jerky by the time after you marinate it and smoke it, and it's delicious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's a really good recipe. I just never the mayonnaise with the bacon wrapped yellowtail. That sounds delicious.
It is. Put some sesame seeds on there and throw it on the barbecue, and then the mayonnaise practically will explode. You got to watch out for the fire because you don't want your steaks catching fire. But it seals when the mayonnaise burns up like that, it seals the juice in, and it keeps it very nice. And I usually will cook the bacon partially because you don't leave the fish on there long enough for the bacon to cook. That's the main thing people do wrong with fish is overcook it. Any kind of seafood shouldn't be overcooked.
How about your marinade? Did you have like a special marinade or just any generic marinade?
Yeah, generally I'd make my own. I use lime juice and a little wine and some. I'd like peanut oil if I was going to have people that weren't allergic to peanuts. And let's see, garlic, pepper. That's pretty close to most of it, I think, without going and looking up the recipe. And that would be white wine too, unless it was yellowtail, and then you could use red wine if you wanted to. Yellowtail for tuna, or
Yeah. How did you find out about like those recipes? Like, so the club, did you guys have cooking as a big portion of some of the education actually in the club when you guys would talk about it, like different ways to cook fish? Was that a big focus?
Yeah. We used to. I put several recipes in there when I was diving of recipes for smoking fish, recipes for making fish chowder, and recipes for barbecuing. And so other members put different recipes and methods of doing things in there like that. It wasn't every month. I mean, we'd put it in there. Usually the newsletter editor was looking for any kind of stuff he could put in there. So
I think that's a one of the great things about our club is like when guys have been diving for so long, they actually don't realize how much knowledge you have until you talk with younger members or younger divers, and you say a couple of things and they're just like blown away by it. And I think it's funny because it's just stuff you acquired over like, you know, the years, and you forget about what it's like to start out without any mentorship or direction or anything like that. You know, for a long time you just swam off the beach and figured it out on your own. That's kind of what we did. I mean, how did you figure out the freediving aspect of everything back, you know, in the 60s? Did they obviously didn't have any classes or anything? Did you get stuff just passed down from diver to diver?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said, I got referred to Jack. I was buying a gun. I wanted to buy a gun, and the guys at the diving locker said, "Well, you know, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to shoot yellowtail or something like that." And they said, "Well, you probably maybe the only guns we got in here, you know, are more for not that big a fish, maybe. So you might want to call, you know, see if you can talk to Jack Berdanovich. He's lives over in Point Loma." And so I called, and he said, "Sure, come on over and we'll talk about it. I'll tell you, and I'll sell a gun to you if you're." So I went over there, and Jack was always willing to talk to anybody about diving, and it was the beginning of a nice friendship for me and for him too. I hope. I think it was. I only dove with him a few times. I dove with him once on my boat, but he had gotten to the age where the sunshine and the pounding of the boat was a little tough to take, and my boat was only a 21-foot boat, so it wasn't all that big, and it wasn't all that comfortable, and there was not all that much shade. So, and I dove with him once on a commercial trip to San Clemente for spearfishing. He and Wally were on that trip. So, you know, just word of mouth.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I just think we take a lot of things for granted. And I think that's why you got to give so much respect to a lot of the older divers. There was no social media. There was nothing, before. And it's just really cool to see how, I mean, I always felt like spearfishing was kind of cultish back then, where everybody was pretty open, because if you found another diver, you were all excited to meet another diver, a buddy to dive with. And, everything was like word of mouth. For me, originally when I was starting too. Did it feel like that? I mean, it's like almost like cultish.
Yeah, I know one thing I figured out on my own. When you're diving, you don't want to make eye contact with a fish. If you've got a school of, say, 50 or so fish, or whether there's 5 of them there, if you can point the gun at them, but don't look them in the eye, because boy, that fish will get you looking at him right in the eye, and he'll go into a gear you never thought was possible, and jet on out of there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, as far as looking a fish in the eye, and it's like nowadays you can read about it, and someone will tell you, like, you're saying now, don't look a fish in the eye. But then, back in I can't imagine the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where it's, you figure it out pretty quick, I guess, after you spook the first 5 of them, not to look at them. And then
it took me longer than that.
Was it? Oh, yeah. The first 25, 50 times, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's pretty cool. I mean, did you ever dive with Terry Moss?
I don't think I did. I've talked with him a bit, and he mentioned me in his book. I got a page in there, and he sent me an autographed copy of it, which I've still got. I'm pretty sure I didn't ever dive with him, though.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, you must have heard stories about all the giant bluefin and all that stuff down in Guadalupe Island.
Yeah. I did all my diving in the Sea of Cortez from Loretto. Like I said, I made that. I used to go down there for 1 day to drive down, 6 days of diving, and then 1 day to drive back. And we were shooting really, grouper and cabiria and amberjack and roosterfish.
What was your goal of going down there? Were you looking for big yellowtail or grouper, or just trying to get away and dive?
Well, I like the cabiria, and if I'd shoot 15, 20 pound cabiria on up to, I shot them up to about 40 pounds, and grouper, and I'd bring a lot of fish back with me when I came back from down there. I'd shoot yellowtail there too, and we would eat a lot of fish when we went down there, of course.
Yeah, that sounds like some huge cabiria. 40. You said 40 pounds?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That'd be pretty awesome. I know. I think the record is around 50 pounds or something like that, but for spotted cabiria. Yeah. How was the traveling down there at the time? I imagine when you got past Cincinnati, it was kind of like the Wild West.
Well, the traveling back when they first opened the road was just, it was a 2-lane road with a lot of times not much of a shoulder. And it was kind of, I'd leave here at midnight, so I'd get in there around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was certainly a dangerous ride, but we had a few occurrences, but no major crashes. I rolled one truck down there, but nobody got hurt. We were going relatively slow. And it was a great place to go dive, but with the changes everywhere, the changes down there, they started having, every time I'd go down there, it seemed like they closed another area that you couldn't spearfish. You could fish there, and you could dive there, but you couldn't spearfish there. But the fishermen could fish there. And we would go down, and, there was times when I was down there where Alfredo, the guy that I met and would stay with and ran the boats for us, the fishermen would be there and they wouldn't be catching any fish because the fish were all eating little tiny pinheads, and they didn't want a sardine or anything else. And we could shoot them, provided the visibility was good. If the visibility was screwed up, the fishermen could catch them, and we couldn't see them to get them. So everybody got their turn. But they had closed out more places to where it just got to be too much of a hassle for me to bother with going down there.
Yeah, I've heard that in several places down in Baja, southern Baja especially, where they do not want divers down there at all. You can fish it, but for whatever reason, it's a co-op there or whoever it is, they don't want spearfishing in there at all. And I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sure there's a reason. But I don't know if it's fishing because you can release the fish, or not. But yeah, it's definitely not the first time hearing that story.
Yeah, well, I can tell you why they feel that way, because Mexicans have gone out there, and this is not gringos, this is Mexicans have gone out there on those reefs and shoals and gone down there with hookah and taken everything off of it. And spearfishermen, you just can't hurt those fish that bad. I mean, there just aren't enough spearfishermen to do that. And
I think divers,
it's a misplaced.
Yeah, I think divers take like less than 1% of all fish intake,
Oh, I'm sure it's less than 1%.
Yeah. I mean, think about how many times you swim around and you see fish and you don't shoot anything. even with our population growing the way that it is, I don't see us making it drastic, doing drastic damage to certain areas. I think we're specifically where we can really kind of have an impact is on, smaller reefs when we're going and targeting certain species. And we just hit it hard every weekend. And then eventually, especially slow growing fish like sheep's head.
Yep. There's lots of times I've gone out, but I haven't got anything.
Right. I mean, that's more often than not half the time for me, especially when you're being selective.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to wrap things up here. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but do you have any good shark stories from diving the Coronado?
Shark stories?
Yeah, shark stories.
Well, one day I was diving out of a children's pool, and I was out about quarter to a half mile outside, kind of working my way, west, away from La Jolla shores. And I see a boat coming toward me, and it's a pretty good size open fishing boat. They kept coming, and eventually they got up to where I was, and they said there are a couple of commercial fishermen in there, and they got a big net saying whatever. Anyway, they said, hey, we've been running our gill nets up off La Jolla, up off Del Mar and down from there, and we've seen this big shark, and we've been following him, and he's coming your way. And I said, well, okay, you mind if I get in? You sure it wasn't, because the way they were describing it, I said, you sure it wasn't a killer whale because of the size of it? And he said, no, we're commercial fishermen. We know the difference between a killer whale and a shark. It's a shark, and it's big. And so I said, well, do you mind if I get in your boat and take a look at it? And they said, no. So I handed them my gun, got up over the side, and they went back up north a little ways, and could see the fin sticking out of the water, and it's headed from where we came from. So I said, can you get up alongside of it so I can take a look at it? I'd like to see if it's a hammerhead. Because we had one of my friends that had a run-in with a hammerhead 2 summers in a row. And so I said, yeah. So we pulled up alongside of it, and this is a 21, 22 foot boat, and that shark was, when he pulled up alongside of it, it was as big as the boat, and it was a white. And the guy says, do you want to shoot it? And I said, with this? I got a Predator's gun with a reel on it. And I said, no, I don't think so. And so he said, well, okay, what do you want to do now? I said, well, you can take me back over where I was, and I can get off there, I guess. He said, you're going to get back in the water? I said, well, my clothes are over on the beach somewhere. And, yeah, I'm going to get back in the water. He said, well, you're not worried about it? I said, well, I haven't shot anything today, and there's no blood in the water that I know of. And he seems to be, if you guys have been following him all this way and he's going south, we'll go over that ways a little bit way, so I'm not right in his way. And, yeah, I'm going to get back in the water. So I did. And I never saw him again, which was okay by me.
That's a big girl. You want to shoot it, I imagine the shaft would probably bounce off the damn thing.
No, I don't think it would bounce off. I think it would go in, but then I'm going to lose my gun.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to have, I guess, jaws, half-inch line and cleat it off to the boat. Hopefully the boat didn't sink.
Yeah. I've seen a few more sharks in Loretto and around that area, but I never had another run-in personally. I know of a few up here, but that was the only really significant one that I had.
Well, that's pretty good, though. I mean, all those years, just that one encounter.
Yeah, and I spent probably 1,000 hours in the water because I was free diving 3 days a week after I retired. And before that, whenever I could, and then in the winter, I was tank diving. So I spent an awful lot of hours in the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people telling stories. I guess I've just been lucky. I've seen them out of the water before getting in or getting out, or never while I was in the water. Fortunately, as far as the great white's concerned. Well, Bill, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with myself and the listeners. Is there anything you want to say, like in closing statements to all the divers that are listening?
No, I'll tell you this. I had some of the guys that I dove with kind of complaining about the fact that guys are diving now have got it so good. And I said, yeah, they're getting an occasional wahoo up here, and they're shooting some tuna and some stuff we didn't get a shot at. But would you rather have it the way it is now with all this regulation and over-regulation where you can't dive here, you can't do this, you can't do that? You got to have a visa, a passport, a tourist card, insurance, this, that, other thing. Would you rather have your turn at it now than what we had when we're doing it? And he said, yeah, well, okay, yeah, we're satisfied with what we had. And I'm certainly satisfied I had my turn at it when I had my turn. I wish everybody well doing it, and I think it's a great sport. That's it.
Thank you, Bill, for everything you did to contribute, to the San Diego freedivers and the local dive community and just diving in general. I really appreciate the I guess, all the hardships or just putting in all the work for us so we could benefit from your knowledge. So thanks for that.
Okay, well, you're sure welcome. Enjoyed talking with you.
All right, that concludes this episode of the Spearfactor. Thanks again to Bill for taking the time out of your day to give me a call and share all those experiences with us here on the show. And I just wanted to say thanks again to Tom for reaching out. I appreciate it. And you guys stay safe out there.